Well, there goes the warranty. I guess now it's time to call this thing old. Just got done doing one of my regular accounts with it. So, about 3 years and 8 months it took to rack up 500 hours on this thing. We got it delivered here on August 31st, 2016, and today is April 28th, 2020. So, at this point, the tractor's basically paid for itself. Alright guys, so this is going to be the 500 hour update video on the John Deere X570. Just a quick disclaimer before we start. If you've been around my channel for a while and you've seen my previous update videos on this machine, the first part of this video is going to just be a reiteration of those previous parts, so I encourage you to skip ahead. I'll include the timestamp in the video here in a second, so feel free to skip ahead. But for those of you who are new to my channel or have not seen my videos of the X570 before, I'll just give you a little bit of the backstory just to reiterate. So we purchased this X570 back in August of 2016 as a replacement for our John Deere 316 that caught fire. At the time I was getting ready to go off to college. I do most of the maintenance on the equipment around here, and I also have a small local lawn mowing business, lawn care business. At its peak I was managing about 14 or 15 accounts a week. Which may not seem like a lot if some of you, for some of you guys that are in commercial lawn care, but when you're just one guy doing everything, and all the properties are over an acre in size, it does get to be pretty busy. So our 316 caught fire, and we wanted a good, substantial machine to replace it. A machine that was heavy duty enough for my lawn mowing business, because a lot of the lawns I mow around here are hilly and involve some very rough terrain. Just to give you an example, you can see some of my neighbors' houses there on the other side of the street. They have some steep hills and stuff, especially with walkout basements. And some of the properties I mow are very rough as well. So I needed a substantial machine, a garden tractor basically, that was heavy enough to withstand all of that rough terrain mowing, as well as, was suitable enough to use around here, and could also be converted to use for ground engaging duty like garden work or snow removal if it ever came down to it. Like I said, we bought this machine as I was getting ready to move away to college, and at the time we decided to buy a brand new machine rather than used because we wanted something with a good warranty. Our John Deere dealer is right down the road, so we wanted something that was fairly simple, easy to work on, and it came with a good warranty. So while I was away at school, if something broke or went bad on it, my dad could just take it to the dealer down the road and they'd fix it under warranty. And it was also, it needed to be substantial for my mowing business, like I said. So we skipped right over the X300 series and went to the X500 series. The X300 series aren't bad tractors, but they're a little too small and a little bit too light for what I need. They would be fine for just mowing our acre property around here, which is mostly flat and smooth. But for all the other mowing that I do for my business, I needed something a little bit heavier. We decided not to go with an X700 series. Well, one, because of the cost, and two, because honestly, for what I need around here, they're just too big. I don't need a super garden tractor for the work I do. And additionally, I also have my other, older brute garden tractors that I do most of the rough work with. My fleet is always changing, but right now I've got my 318, my Cub Cadet 782, and my John Deere 210, which lives across the street there at my grandparents' house. So I didn't, see a need for a big, heavy X700 series garden tractor. It just would have been too much. I'm planning to move out and get my own place in the next couple years, and I'll be bringing my old garden tractors with me. So eventually this will be the only machine left around here, the X570. So, someday if my dad decides to retire the old walk-behind snowblower, he could easily convert this one over to a snowplow or snowblower tractor, and he could also get a sleeve hitch for the back and convert it to use for garden work if he wanted to. So it's a good all-around machine, not too big, not too small. It's a great size for our acre yard and for the other properties that I take care of. And like I said, it's very versatile. It could easily be converted over to do different jobs aside from mowing. But in the 4 years we've had it, we've mainly used it for mowing and just for lawn work. So as you saw in the first part of this video, the machine just recently crossed 500 hours. It only took about 4 years, not even 4 years, to reach that point. But I use this machine much more frequently than the typical homeowner, obviously, since I have my lawn care business. And my lawn care business has actually been winding down as I'm preparing to graduate college and move on to the next chapter in my life. But I'm still mowing a little bit here and there, just not as many accounts as I used to have. But it's still getting pretty frequently used. But like I said, this season in particular, it hasn't seen quite as much use now that I have a deck for my 318, and I've also done a lot of mowing with my Cub Cadet 882 diesel. So sometimes it's nice to get away from the new machines and put the old machines back to work. So ever since this machine crossed the 500-hour mark and the warranty expired, I decided to just kind of put it away in the shed and only use it as needed. It seems like we just bought this thing yesterday, but it's starting to show its age. I mean, it is a 500-hour machine now, and it has been used commercially, so it's going to have the usual dings and scratches. You can see a lot of the scratches in the hood from going under tree branches, and the tires are starting to show a little bit of wear. The front brush guard's got its share of scratches on it as well. Like I said, it is a 500-hour machine now. It's not brand new anymore, so it's not going to look perfect. I do take care of my machines, but I'm also not the type to, wash and wax them after every mow. I just don't. For a working machine, I don't feel that it's necessary. I had somebody ask me what I do to clean this machine. There's nothing to it, just a little water and a rag every once in a while. Every 25 hours, I take the mower deck off the machine. I pressure wash the whole machine, get all the grease and dust and debris off of it, because that stuff builds up pretty quickly when you're mowing in a lot of dry areas especially. I also pressure wash the deck as well as the underside of the deck. I only do that when the mower deck has not been used and all the parts are cooled down. You don't want to wash a mower deck that's just recently been run, mainly because the spindles build up a lot of heat, and the last thing you need to do is put water in the heated spindles, or in the bearings, I should say. So I pressure wash the tractor and everything when it hasn't been used, when everything's been sitting. I tear take the hood off. Usually I'll take the flywheel cover off of the engine and clean out all the debris that gets built up inside. A lot of people forget to do that on these air-cooled engines, and that's a very important step to prolonging the life of the engine, especially if you keep it in the shed. They have they're susceptible to mice getting in there and building nests and things like that can cause the engine to overheat. So every once in a while, it's always a good idea to take the flywheel cover off and just clean out the shrouds underneath. On this particular engine, the Kawasaki FS730V, it's not too hard to do. You just got to take out a couple of 10mm bolts. Undo the clamps, undo these 2 screws for the fuel pump, and then take these 3 Torx screws out for the flywheel screen. There's really not much to it. It only takes a couple extra minutes of your time, and it's an excellent way to prolong the life of your engine. So every 25 hours I clean that up. I also clean out the mower deck, sharpen the blades, and grease the tractor and the deck. So real quick, I'll just go over some of the pros of the machine. They really, for the most part, they really haven't changed since the last update video I made. There's really not much I can say. The Kawasaki engine runs great. It's got lots of power. It's super reliable. It always starts right up on the first crank, and it does everything I need it to. The 48-inch Excel Deep mower deck is honestly probably one of the best mowing decks I've ever had on any of my tractors. I'm glad that we bought this tractor when we did, because the 2016 and newer X500 series and X300 series were the first to use this new style deck. The Excel Deep deck uses a much heavier shell, and it has a deeper design to it, so it increases the amount of airflow, which greatly improves your cut quality. And another nice little feature that I've discussed in the past is these spring-loaded spindle covers, which make it much easier to clean out around the spindles and to grease as well. I haven't really had any issues with this deck, except at one point in the past, another family member was running the machine. I won't mention any names. They were running the machine. They hit a manhole cover that they didn't see. It was covered in some tall grass, and ended up bending this spindle and bending the blade with it. So I had to replace this spindle, and Also had to replace this belt since it had started to stretch the belt. Just another quick thing I want to mention regarding the mower deck here. Like I said, I'm very happy with the 48-inch Excel Deep mower deck. The one complaint I have about it, though, is the way that these baffles are welded underneath the shell. As you can see, there's a lot of space between the front lip of the deck and the baffles underneath. And as a result, it leaves a lot of tight, nooks and crannies where grass and debris can get packed in here. So every 25 hours when I take the deck off the machine and I clean it or pressure wash it out, there's always grass packed in these tight corners here. If you don't pay attention to that and you just let the grass build up, that can cause the deck to rot out very quickly. So I've been pretty good with it ever since the machine was new. I've been, on top of keeping the deck clean and trying to prevent rust in any way I can. I don't use any undercoating. I don't use graphite coating or anything like that. In my opinion, the best way to prevent a deck from rusting out is to just keep it clean. That's the best thing I can tell you. Try not to mow when the grass is wet, and make sure you get all the little nooks and crannies when you're cleaning out underneath the deck. That's why I usually have to pressure wash it, because trying to scrape stuff out of here with a putty knife like some people do just simply won't get it done. So that's just another thing to keep in mind when you own one of these machines. I also don't bother to use the washout port because, in my opinion, it's just not worth the trouble. This tractor has the Tough Torque K72 transaxle made by Kanzaki. They are a belt drive transaxle. I've discussed my thoughts on belt drive systems in the past in the 250-hour video. Go check that out if you haven't already. The K72 transaxle is very beefy for a machine of this size, and it produces plenty of torque for climbing hills and going over rough terrain, and it seems to have plenty of pulling power too. I've pulled cars around with this tractor. I pulled my other garden tractors around with this thing, and I pulled a lot of heavy loads with it, and this thing, the K72 transaxle, handles the loads with ease. The only issue I've had with this transaxle is the seal where the swash plate arm, which is what controls the forward reverse pedal linkage, the seal where that goes into the transaxle casing went bad, so it actually leaked this past winter. It dripped all the oil out of that seal, so I had to have the dealer replace that seal under warranty. But other than that, I haven't had any issues with this transaxle. I actually did just today. I replaced the traction drive belt, the transaxle drive belt. I managed to get just over 500 hours out of it, which isn't too bad, especially considering how much I've used this machine. I have put a lot more hours on it in the past 4 years than the typical homeowner will. In the first 2 years we had this machine, I put 200 hours on it each season. I don't know too many people that are using their machines that much. But I managed to get just over 500 hours out of the original drive belt, and while I am kind of bummed that it only lasted 4 years, it's the hours that count. Now, I know some of you guys may have your opinions about drive belt machines versus shaft-driven machines, but for just mowing grass, they're fine. And, drive belt life is kind of subjective. It depends on how you take care of the machine, what you're doing with it, and, additionally, if you store your machine outside, that can, cause the belt to dry rot and crack much quicker. This machine's always been stored inside. I have had to store it outside a couple nights, but just typical wear and tear, and for commercial use as well. It's not too surprising that I got just over 500 hours out of the belt. I apologize for the poor lighting. It's pretty hot today. My phone's overheating and it won't let me use the flashlight. But like I said, I just got done changing the drive belt today. A lot of people that I've talked to, even some John Deere mechanics, have told me how much they dread changing the drive belts on one of these machines. But honestly, I didn't think it was too bad. As long as you have an impact wrench and you have the right tools, it can go pretty smoothly. All I had to do was take the main bolt out of the PTO clutch there, as well as loosen up that nut there that holds it in place, and drop the PTO clutch a few inches so I could access the main drive sheave there on the crankshaft. I had to disconnect the two tie rods there where they connect to the steering sector gear. And I also had to remove the bell crank assembly, which is that piece there that holds the two idler pulleys in place. I'm not completely sure what size that flange nut is, but my 15/16 inch socket seemed to be the best fit. So I just dropped that assembly out. That made it much easier to install the belt. And you usually, at least in my experience, you want to start by putting the belt around the rear pulley on top of the transaxle first. That way you don't have to worry about trying to slip it over at the very end, and you have to be careful not to break the plastic fans off of the plastic fins off the cooling fan also. While I was at it, I also replaced the plastic idler pulley that you see there on the left, the black one. I was kind of disappointed to see that John Deere uses a plastic idler pulley there instead of a metal one. From what I could find in the parts diagrams, John Deere did used to use a metal idler pulley on these, but in recent years they switched to the plastic one. And the plastic, it has a metal bushing inside, but the bushing goes bad after so many hours, so it's a good idea to replace that pulley as well. It's not too hard to do though. Like I said, I dropped that entire assembly out and did it on the bench. It was pretty easy. Only took a couple minutes. Then I just reinstalled the PTO clutch and put everything back together, and it works good with the new belt. So the new drive belt was about $78 from my local John Deere dealer, which I wasn't very happy about. But like I said, I can't really complain much with what kind of with the service life I've gotten out of it and that I've gotten out of this machine in general. In terms of ergonomics and operator comfort, I have no complaints about the machine. It's a very comfortable and very nimble machine. Everything is easy to use. This machine gets the job done very fast. Not that you should mow fast, but if I'm in a rush, if I have a lot of ground to cover and I have a lot of work to do, and I need to get stuff done, I usually resort to the X570. I'll save the old machines for a day when I have a lot more time to spend. But if I have a lot of ground to cover, this is the machine that I go to. The X570 gets the job done fast, and with the Excel Deep mower deck, it cuts like a dream. The twin touch hydrostatic is super easy to use, especially for somebody like me who's always changing between forward and reverse. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Everything is very simple. This particular model, being a 2016 first year model, does not have the cutout for the electric on-demand mulching kit. Personally, I don't see a need for that because having an electrically actuated mulching kit is just more equipment to go wrong. It's more wiring, it's more hardware, and honestly, it's not too difficult to make your own mulch plug if you really wanted to. John Deere also sells a manually operated mulch kit for these decks, but I haven't really seen the need for it. And like I said, this machine, being an earlier one, does not have the cutout for that switch. So I believe the 2017 and newer models do, but this one does not. The electronic LED screen display here on the dash is also very handy. It's not the most accurate, especially regarding the fuel gauge. If you run the machine on a hillside, it's obviously going to give you a different reading for the fuel level, but I haven't really had any issues with it. The one thing I can say about it is don't get it wet. If you're washing the machine off, just try not to get it wet, because sometimes it'll give you a bit of an erratic reading. Sometimes this thing will flicker if I accidentally spray under there with the hose or the pressure washer, but everything else on it, or on this display, is pretty nice to have, and seems to work pretty good. I haven't had any issues with it. Now, on to the cons. After 500 hours, I can say, honestly, the only major disappointment I have with this machine is the front end. If you saw my 250-hour update video on this tractor, I talked about how I was having issues with the steering. Well, unfortunately, that carried over into front axle problems as well. The X570 is the base model of the X500 series, and as a result, it shares some components with the X300 series, the smaller models in John Deere's lineup, mainly the front axle and the steering. This tractor actually uses the front axle out of the X300 series tractors, evident by the smaller spindles that use these rubber caps instead of the larger spindles that have the plastic caps. The X580, 584, and 590 use the heavier duty front axle with the larger spindles that have the big hard plastic caps. Those tractors all have power steering, and as a result they have a much more durable front axle, but the X570, being the economy model in the series, has the X300 series front axle. The biggest thing I can say about this is if you're not mowing over rough terrain, or you're not being too hard on the machine, or weighing the front end down too much, it should be okay. But in my experience, that hasn't been the case. Over the course of 500 hours, I've managed to break both front wheel spindles. The first one happened due to neglect. Another family member was running it, and the ball joint here actually popped out, and then when he hit a bump, the whole spindle turned completely around and sheared right off, so we had to replace that one. That one got replaced under warranty, but this one sheared because of a bad wheel bearing, which was kind of surprising. The bearing basically welded itself to the spindle, and the way to make a long story short, basically the center of the wheel separated from the rim, and it basically broke the spindle along with it. I was kind of surprised to see that. I've never seen that happen on a machine before. So that was kind of unfortunate, and I was a little irritated that happened, but the dealer replaced that. They got us a new spindle and a new wheel. So I was a little irritated about that, and nobody should, especially for what these machines cost. This cost us about $6,000 when it was new. Nobody should have to deal with front-end issues like that. And as I mentioned in my 250-hour video, after about 240 hours, I had to replace the sector gear, which is the large tooth gear you see there where the tie rods hook up, because the teeth actually wore off. Once again, this machine uses the steering components from the X300 series, so they're a little bit lighter duty. In my opinion, these parts are not the proper caliber. They're just not heavy duty enough for a machine of this size and cost. So the dealer replaced the sector gear, as you can see there, and I also was told about an upgrade you can do where you add some shims to the steering shaft there to help bring the pinion gear closer to the sector. I mentioned that in my last video, but to be honest with you, I actually haven't done that upgrade simply because I wanted to see how this one wears compared to the first one. So I got 240 hours out of the first sector gear before the teeth all wore off and I had to get it replaced. And this one, I've got about 260, 270 hours on it, and the teeth all seem to be fine. So I don't know if that was just a defective part originally or what, but I figured I would just leave it stock for now just to see the wear patterns. I figure if it does it again, if it wears the teeth off again, then I know it's a defective part. It definitely helps to add some white lithium grease on those teeth, though, on the sector gear, because that helps reduce the friction and reduce the wear when you're steering. Of course, it also helps to not use the machine on rough ground, but unfortunately with some of the lawns that I've mowed with this machine, I don't really have much of a choice. So this machine has been subject to some very rough and bumpy lawns, and also a lot of lawns that are hilly, like I mentioned before. So basically what I'm trying to say is if you have a piece of property that is very hilly or rough and will cause the front axle to do a lot of flexing and will put a lot of strain on those front end components and steering components, the X570 just is not for you. You're going to want to jump up to an X580 or X590 for the heavier front end components. For what we paid for this machine, I should not have to be dealing with flimsy front end components. I shouldn't have had to replace both spindles and the steering sector gear. I'm still pretty bitter about that. I guess, honestly, I think that's why the X570 is not advertised as a multi-terrain tractor. All the previous X500 series were advertised as multi-terrain. They would usually say it under the model number decal here. And I believe the higher end X500 series are also advertised as that, but the X570 is not. So I think the front axle being lighter is the one thing that sets it apart. And that's the one regret I have with buying this machine. The front axle is just not heavy enough. Okay, now for this next part of the video, I'd like to touch on a few comments that I've gotten on my other X570 videos over the past couple years and just give you a little insight. So one of the comments I've received somewhat frequently has been, people dissing the plastic hood, saying like, oh, why are you spending all that money on a machine that still has a plastic hood, not a metal hood? Well, truthfully, who really needs a metal hood? I mean, I've owned plenty of garden tractors with metal hoods. Take my Cub Cadet 782 here, for instance. And don't get me wrong, having a metal hood is nice. Metal is very durable. It's resistant to, any kind of debris or things like that. But for what I'm doing, just mowing grass, the plastic hood is just fine. In previous years, especially, in the late 80s, in the 90s, and in the early 2000s, John Deere did not have a reputation for good quality plastic hoods. The plastic they used was very flimsy, and it would often break. It would shatter like glass, seemingly at the drop of a hat. But John Deere has worked to improve the quality of their plastic in more recent years. The plastic that they use on their hoods now is called Loy. It's basically a byproduct of soybeans, and it's a much more durable compound than what John Deere was using in previous years. And like I said, I use this machine commercially. I've run it into trees and stuff, or run underneath low-hanging tree branches. I've had tree branches fall directly on top of this hood. I've had heavy objects drop on this hood, and I haven't had any issues with it. I mean, you can see how it's getting some scratches in it here and there, which is typical for a machine that's getting used commercially. But I have not had any structural issues with this hood. It's held up very well for what I need. And also another advantage of having a plastic hood is that the plastic absorbs the sound and the vibration of the engine much better than fiberglass or steel. Like I said, I don't mind having a steel hood on my older tractors, especially the old Cub Cadets, but when the engine in this tractor runs, the hood vibrates a lot, and over time it actually wears grooves in the lip of the plastic dash. As you can see there, you can see it's wore a groove all the way around. And on my other Cub Cadet, my 882 diesel with the little 3-cylinder Kubota diesel, those little 3-cylinder engines vibrate like crazy. And over time, at least on my tractor, the edge of the hood actually wore a hole through the lip there in the dash. So just from the vibration. And like I said, because the plastic does a much better job of absorbing sound and vibration. The steel hoods not so much. The steel hoods vibrate a lot more. They make more noise. And like I said, they can cause more wear on your dash. I don't have to worry about that with the plastic. So if you're hesitant to buy one of these machines because of the plastic hood, trust me, you have nothing to be afraid of. As long as you're not intentionally, dropping cinder blocks on the hood or something like that. Every once in a while you hear about one of these hoods breaking, but like I said before, it all depends on what you use the machine for and how well you take care of it. Of course, a machine that spends its life outside, if you store your machine outside where it's subject to the heat of the sun, obviously that's going to make the plastic a little more brittle over time, and it will be more prone to breakage, but typically you don't have to worry about it with a machine like this. Another comment that I've received a handful of times on my X570 videos are regarding the transaxle. I've had a couple people say that this tractor has a plastic transaxle. You couldn't be any further from the truth. The only models in the John Deere lineup that use the plastic transaxle are the D105 and the E100, which are the basic, bare bones, entry level, bottom of the barrel, consumer grade lawn tractors, if you even want to call them lawn tractors. Cheapest machine you can get. Those tractors are designed to mow, a small acreage, maybe once every week or two. They're not designed to do any heavy work. They're not designed to tow any heavy loads or pull any steep hills. So, for doing just that, like mowing a small acreage that's relatively flat and smooth, the plastic transaxle is just fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, if that's all you're doing. Now, don't go out and buy one and expect to, pull heavy loads or pull hills with it, because then you're just asking too much of it. Those tractors have a plastic transaxle housing with metal internals, and from what I've heard from the handful of people I've talked to that run those machines, they haven't had any issues with the plastic transaxle. Like I said, if you're just mowing, a fairly smooth or small piece of yard, the plastic transaxle does just fine. The K72 transaxle in the X500 series, and is also used in a lot of other brands as well, is a very durable transaxle. It has an aluminum casing, as many garden tractor transaxles have used for years. Both of those tractors have aluminum transaxle housings as well. There's nothing wrong with that. Aluminum dissipates heat, and it saves a little bit of weight. And the internals are beefed up, so it's damn near impossible to destroy one of these things unless you're really beating on it. But like I said before, I haven't had any issues with the transaxle in this machine. I've pulled a lot of heavy loads with it, and done a lot of heavy work with it, and it's never given me any trouble aside from that leaking seal, but that that has to do with nothing internally. And it also has a higher torque rating than the Cub Cadet Chinese hydrostatic transaxle. Those use a shaft-driven hydrostatic transaxle made by the Hydro Gear company, and that's like their main selling point. The shaft-driven rear end has been Cub Cadet's selling point for many years, but the transaxles in those, at least the cast iron housings, are actually made in China. I even have proof. I'll show you a picture of my grandfather's old Cub Cadet that he used to own. And the pumps in those are not very strong. So don't be deceived by the promises of, you know, direct shaft drive, endless torque, and all that stuff that Cub Cadet will try and sell you. They may have a shaft drive cast iron rear end in their XT3 series tractors, but it's rated for less capacity than the belt drive K72 here. And truthfully, at least in my experience, their shaft driven rear end is just not it's not all it's made out to be. They're not strong like the old Cub Cadets, the real Cub Cadets like you see there. Just one more important topic I want to touch on here. This seems to be a fairly controversial topic in the mower community. I had somebody comment on one of my previous videos on this machine that it uses fake grease fittings on the deck spindles. It's not uncommon for manufacturers these days to put grease fittings on mower decks that use sealed bearings instead of true, you know, ball bearings or roller bearings in their spindles. And a lot of people, as a result, think that, you know, you actually can't grease the spindles. Even if your machine does come with sealed bearings instead of, you know, true ball bearings in the spindles, you're not hurting anything by occasionally greasing them. Just like how the oil in an engine helps to transfer heat away from all the major components, greasing the spindles helps to transfer heat away from the major, you know, moving components like the bearings and shafts. The grease absorbs a lot of the heat. So even if your deck does not have true ball bearings in it, you know, greasing them at least helps them to stay cool. These mower deck spindles create a lot of heat and a lot of friction when these decks are being operated, when the spindles are all turning. So having even a little bit of grease in those spindles helps to keep the bearings cool, which helps them last longer and prolongs the life of the deck. So that's pretty much all I have for this video. I figured the last thing to do is to start it up and let you guys hear it run. I usually have to choke it when I start it because the carburetors on these engines are designed to run very lean, so they almost always have to be choked. But this thing always starts up pretty much instantly. I'll tell you what, for having that many hours on it, this Kawasaki still runs like it's brand new. It's got tons of power, never had any issues with it. I always change the oil every 50 hours or so. As far as new equipment goes, I will only run Kawasaki engines from now on. I like the older stuff, but when it comes to new equipment, Kawasaki is the way to go. For me, anyway. No regrets with this thing at all. I've done 2 valve adjustments on it, basically every 200 hours, so when it hits 600 hours, I'll do another valve adjustment. I change the oil every 50 hours, and, you know, like I said before, periodically clean out the air filter and check the spark plugs and fuel filter and all that, and clean out the cooling shrouds, but this thing runs like a top. Never let me down. I also had to put a new battery in it a couple months ago because the original John Deere battery finally crapped out, but I put a Deca battery in it, so it'll be good for 10 years. Still runs like new. Gotta love it. So anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for this 500-hour review on the X570. Hope you liked the video. If you liked it, please feel free to comment, rate, and subscribe. And if you have any questions about the machine or you're in the market for one, you know, feel free to comment any questions you have or send me an email. I'd be more than glad to answer any questions you have. Hopefully someday I can do a 1,000-hour review on this machine, but I'm sure by then these X500 series will be long outdated and forgotten, so who knows. It didn't take too long to rack up 500 hours on this machine, but like I said before, I'm not using it as frequently as I used to now that my lawn care business is kind of winding down. So this, for the most part, will just be used to mow around here and across the street from now on. You know, unless my dad wants to convert it over to snow removal or garden duty someday, but I know it'll be ready to handle any task we throw at it. But anyway, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.